Hello, and welcome to our fun Halloween Tipsy topic with Tory and Tom. We have a special guest who's going to complement the theme quite well. Tom, we want to introduce our guest.
Oh, that will be my pleasure, Tory. I'm sitting out here in the haunted field, so I'm feeling the spirit tonight on Halloween. It's great that we have Chris Cooke with us this evening. Chris is a friend, a fellow board member with myself on the Vanderbilt County Historical Society. It's been great knowing Chris through the years, super knowledgeable. And Chris has been the Superintendent of Cemeteries for the City of Evansville, Indiana since March of 2008. He is a 2013 graduate and valedictorian of the International Cemetery Cremation Funeral Association University, a 2014 graduate of its master's program, and became a certified cemetery executive in 2017. He is a past chairman and current board member of the Indiana State Board of Funeral and Cemetery Services, having been originally appointed by Governor Mike Pence and then reappointed by Governor Eric Holcomb. Additionally, Chris is a past president and a current board member of the Indiana Cemetery Association. And Chris lives in Evansville with his wife, Liesl, whose name I hope I pronounced correctly, Chris.
You did.
Good. That's probably the most important thing I need to do this evening.
It's like the Von Tramps, you know. She's like, that's what she's named after.
Well, excellent.
Yeah,
that's a good way to remember it. And on this Halloween premiere of our presentation, Chris is going to be presenting Stories from the Graves, a history of Evansville city cemeteries. This presentation is an overview of both Oak Hill and Locust Hill cemeteries and arboretums through time. Additionally, Chris will share a few personal stories. Those are the ones that I'm sure will be exciting, along with the others, from his 13-plus year tenure as Cemetery Superintendent. And Chris, my friend, thanks again for being with us, and it's my distinct pleasure to turn the program over to you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. Oops, did I share the wrong one?
We see Stories from the Grave.
Okay, let me get this going here. One of the things I always start with is we're your cemeterians. We assist people with something that they really don't want, but they need and can't do without. It brings them solace and comfort. Families invest their futures with us. We provide for eternity that one single place that offers comfort and peace, a place they come for reflection and prayer. They're counting on us. We keep families together forever and ever. We're the necessary link joining their here and hereafter. Yes, our work is meaningful. In the most singular sad event of their life, our service is critical to them. They have placed their trust with us. We are your cemeterians. And it's something I try to hammer home every day with the cemeteries here at Oak Hill and Locust Hill Cemetery. We're also Arboretums as well, which I'll get into. But again, I was hired in 2008 by Mayor Weinzappel. I oversee both Oak Hill and Locust Hill Cemeteries and Arboretums. I manage a staff of 6 full-time and 1 part-time with 1 seasonal. The past president of Vanderbilt County Historical Society, a certified celebrant, and I'm also involved with the Cemetery Association and the state board. This is a picture from the valedictorian when I won that. It was a great honor. I think I'm the only municipal cemeterian that's ever been named valedictorian of the program. I hate to bring out the football isms, Tom, but potential is wasted.
Go for it.
Wasted when it's not applied. And I took this opportunity back in 2008, and many of you may know Ed Zemer. He was my boss at the time. And I told him, I thought we'd be called up soon. I had no idea. I was 32. I think I was 32 years old. They threw the keys to me. This is a big place. Oak Hill is a big place. I was very naive when I marched into my office, or my boss's office, and told him that we'd be called up. One of the things that we were honored in 2018 at Oak Hill Cemetery, we made the Final Four essentially at the 2018 American Cemetery Magazine Cemetery Excellence Awards. So we were a runner-up for that international award and had a nice feature and write-up in American Cemetery Magazine. This is a layout of Oak Hill Cemetery. As you can see, the lot layout. Here's some more pictures. These pictures, a lot of them are provided by a volunteer of ours named Liesl. Her vision with some of the stuff, I just can't put into words that I'm thankful for our volunteers that we have. The first interment at Locust or Oak Hill Cemetery was on February 18th, 1853. It was Ellen F. Johnson, a 2-year-old, and many of the walking tours that we go on here, they placed a memorial marker out for her at the 150th anniversary, and we walk right by that in one of the older sections. It talks a little bit, in my slide there, you can see a little bit more about the details I'm not going to get into due to time, but I'm going to kind of go at a quick pace because we've got a lot to get through. The original cemetery deed from way back when in 1852 and 53, when the cemetery was first being bought out. Here's some more pictures of some of the scenery around Oak Hill Cemetery and Arboretum. That right there is Johnson Island, where the Meade Johnson family is interred on Willow Lake. One of the oldest aerial photos that I know of Oak Hill Cemetery, this is in the 1920s. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see my little screen thing moving around.
Yes.
Okay. This would be where Highway 41 is now. And this is Morgan back here to give you some perspective. But this is a nice overview of what the cemetery looked like around the turn of the century. Today, we have over 70,000 or 71,000 interments at Oak Hill Cemetery alone on a 125-acre footprint that's laid out. We have more acreage that's undeveloped, but the 125 represents the acreage that's lotted out. So we've got plenty of room for future cemetery here at Oak Hill and Locust Hill as well. We have several unused acres over there as well. This is actually the oldest known photograph taken in Oak Hill Cemetery. And this would be for the perspective of standing on Virginia Street, looking back into the cemetery on the hill. And it's from the late 1800s. It came from Willard Library. I've spent many a lunch break trying to match up where the stones are on that to get the exact perspective. But you would be standing in what is the modern day section U, looking back into the cemetery on the hill. Everybody's seen the old historic postcards of Evansville. This is one of the administration building that was built by Harris and Shopbell back in 1899. Originally, it was a chapel and a waiting room with a small office. It was remodeled in 1917. Also designed by Sheriff Harris and Shopbell was the gate that was built in 1901. The Brown Rigby brick wall was started thereafter in the 1920s. Sorry about that. Here's another view on a historic postcard of the chapel. This would be looking east, and this would the lake. Actually, the story is, how the chapel and the administration office sits elevated. The pond that's just to the north of the office, they actually dug that to get that elevation when they built the office back in 1899. Here's a postcard of the historic Civil War section. And this again is the historic office / chapel looking kind of to the northeast up the hill. Here's the entrance gate that was built in 1901 that I mentioned. And here again is looking west towards the chapel from up on the hill. Some other scenes, the Swans and Lily Pond with Johnson Island right here. And this is the lake behind the chapel that I mentioned that was built in the 1899. Actually see the blue heron there on the looking south towards the chapel. There's actually blue herons that still come here to feed in that lake. And it's funny that, I try to put back the place to match the postcards when I plant a tree or do something like that. And I don't have to worry about the herons because the blue herons naturally come back. And I imagine it's a generational thing. The other thing with the entrance was built in 1901. This is about 1903 when the picture was taken. You can kind of see the cornfield over to the side. We're going to have some pictures come up that'll better address that. The Civil War section is perhaps one of the most hallowed grounds in the cemetery. There's over 500 Union men and 25 Confederate soldiers and 98 local dead who were buried in 3 separate sections, all victims of the Civil War. A lot of people don't realize there were 7 hospitals in Evansville during the Civil War, and they used the river to transport the injured and dying back to those hospitals. And when they lost their life in the hospitals, many of them were interred here at Oak Hill Cemetery. In 1868, the city began efforts to secure designation from the Union veterans areas as federal property. And they eventually succeeded in that in 1898. And it's actually written into the city code. Here's a black and white picture from the early 1900s looking into the section. And it's actually a part of the city code. As an act of Congress in 1898, $1,000 was appropriated for improving Oak Hill Cemetery and for enclosing the area of the cemetery in which the Union soldiers are buried, on the condition that the city preserve and care for that area forever. The city agreed and accepted that trust and reaffirms its obligation. It's actually written in the city code, but this picture here is from 1909. There's roughly 37 cannons that are in the veterans area for the Civil War. Now, 2 of them, the carriages have met their fate with weather, so they're not on display right now. So there's only 35 that are on display, but the actual fence posts are actual cannons that were utilized in the Civil War. Here's another picture to give you a better idea of what the Civil War area looks like today. And we also have a Confederate burials. Now, we don't know where they're actually buried at. There's different theories, but in 1904, the Fitzhugh-Lee chapter of the Daughters of the Confederacy placed the marker that you see, and on the bottom is the listing of all the Confederate dead that are interred somewhere within the grounds of Oak Hill Cemetery. So this is a little bit different animal than you've seen stories around the areas of the country where they've been taking down Confederate markers. This is actually a memorial stone. So it's a little bit different, and that's why we have one of only 2 that are north of the Ohio River in Indiana, right here in Oak Hill Cemetery. So it's really a piece of history, and a lot of people, you know, with the news media coverage, we've had a lot more activity around that as people try to understand the difference between what differentiates that versus, you know, a statue of Robert E. Lee taken down in Virginia. You know, my job and my task as superintendent is to ensure memorialization for all 71,000 plus that are interred in Oak Hill Cemetery. You know, there's murders, there's child molesters, there's all kinds of evil that's gone on in that, but I have to defend their right to have memorialization, just like I will defend the right for the Confederates to be memorialized because I feel that it's my job to do so. Does that mean that I agree with those people? No, but I have to defend the rights to memorialization because everybody has a family at some point and a place to come back to. That being said, the pictures of some of the historic postcards, I've actually got the actual pictures that I've gotten through the archives. And on the one of the entrance built in 1901, you can get a better view of how they used farming out here with some of the farm crops that they raised on site in some of the areas. And you get a better picture of the herons in the pond behind the chapel in the black and white pictures. Now, there was a nice write-up, you know, when the building was built in 1899, the contract was originally awarded for $9,908.50. So this whole chapel, which if you look at it, the administration building now and chapel at Oak Hill Cemetery is the 2nd oldest continuously used governmental building next to the old courthouse in Vanderbilt County, when you think about it. Here's some more black and whites from the pictures. Now in this picture, looking west towards the chapel, you can see the original residence down here where I'm highlighting. Now that was torn down around 1917 when there was an office that was in that house. They moved everything into the what is now the administration office and renovated it to more what you see when you come out to Oak Hill Cemetery today. The grand entrance gate in June, and this is from an Evansville Journal article on June 2nd, 1901, the entrance and gateway was built at a cost of $2,500. And it also allocated some money for land purchases and lake construction where the Johnson Island and that Willow Lake is. Here's a blueprint of the original gate. Now, the only thing, the metal parts that are on the current gate are different, but the pedestrian gate is original. One of my goals would be in my tenure here would be to find the funds to take the blueprints and reconstruct those ornate gates. And here's a better view of it to see back to what they originally looked like. Here's a picture from the 80s that was taken from one of the archives. And you can really see the ornate gate versus what we have today. Now the pedestrian gate's still the same, but one of my long-term goals would be to rebuild that like you saw. Here's some aerial photos from the 1980s of our chapel. and then our equipment building that was built in the 1920s that's back within the cemetery. The office and house that I mentioned before, here's one of the pictures I have of what it looked like. Now it dates back to 1853, and it came into disrepair. As you can only imagine, it didn't have running water and didn't have modern amenities, and that's why it was torn down. So John Smith Gooch, this is his picture right in front of the house. He was the first superintendent or sexton of the cemetery. He held that position for 45 years. So I think at 13 plus years, I'm fifth all time, but I'm the longest serving tenured, the superintendent that actually didn't have a house here when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
He passed in 1897. Here's a better picture of the Gooch family. The gentleman with the white beard right there, that is John Smith Gooch. And this is obviously, he's interred just east of the administration building. In many of our walking tours, we walk right by his gravesite and honor him and many of the superintendents. Here's a better picture to kind of see him, what he looked like. Again, these are from archives that I've collected from different archives, from USI, from Willard. Some people, family members and stuff have given me some of these pictures over the years.
Have you thought about growing a beard like that in his honor?
Actually, the older I get, the more white it might be. I've been a little bit more white this year after post-pandemic, but
I bet.
I'm going to have to get some of that just for men if I grow it out, because I'm ready to go full on white. These are some pictures of what the cemetery looked like in the early 1900s. These are on the USI archives if you wanted to see them. The wishing well area that is like that just as it is today. This again is looking up the hill towards the chapel, where you can see both the house and the chapel kind of in the same frame to give you an idea of what it looked like. In 1907, there was a nice article that talked about the cemetery in the Evansville Courier on May 19th. And I'm not going to get into that due to time, but it talked about the cemetery had a population of 20,000 in 1907. So you figure now we have 71,000 in 2021. You do the math. There wasn't a lot of competition back in 1907 as far as cemeteries go. Carl K. Knack, the great cartoonist, drew some pictures of the cemetery. Here's a couple of his renderings of the gate and the lake behind the chapel. Here's some more historic, Here's some more historic photos taken a little bit later, because you could see in the picture on the right, the house is gone. So these would be taken post 1917, and you can actually see like a little Model T car sitting in there under the alcove there. See how you have on the right or the left side with the house, then you have on the right without, to kind of show you the difference. And plus you can see the trees are a little more mature, and these two trees are still out there today. They really tell the true story around here. Here's looking west. This was before the holding house was built. So I know that this is pre-1911 because the holding house is right here now. And this is an older picture of the Civil War section, sometime post 1898, because the fencing and stuff is visible. This one right here shows some of the ways that people dressed when they came out to the cemetery. This no doubt was a Sunday afternoon. The family came out after church to picnic at the family plot. Now in the corner, on the right-hand corner in the distance, if you see where I'm at, there's an actual funeral service that's going on, and I'll try to blow that up for you a little bit better. And it's, pardon the quality, but where these black figures are, those are people dressed in mourning, and they're actually at a funeral service. To give you an idea of what a funeral looked like at the time, this is post this Pfluger stone, shows you how mounded up it was and all the flowers that were involved. And this is the Heilman lot around, again, the turn of the century. Let me scroll down here. And I like to do some comparisons. You can see the Heilman from 1903 versus what it looks like today, to kind of show you some perspective of the trees and how things change. Another one you see today, this right here, 1921, this is what it looks like today. And And I know that is the place because we've actually fixed this and straightened it up a little bit since I took the picture. Now we actually have sheet music dedicated to the cemetery. And if you go to our website at evansville.in.gov/cemeteries, you can actually hear what this sheet music sounds like. Now, another goal of mine would be to have it play as our music on hold.
Yeah.
It was dedicated,
clever.
when you think about it, it was dedicated to Oak Hill Cemetery in 1906, I believe. They sure did get what nuclear winter looks like on the cover of the, of the City of the Dead.
Was it a local composer, or do you know? Or
I do not know, but one time I was in here, one of the first couple of years that I was here, a lady brought that in. She was going through a family member's things who had deceased, and they found that, and it's in our archives here, and we preserved it, and
wow,
actually hear what it sounds like. Now, the Oak Hill Holding House was built in 1911. There's a picture of what it looks like today. But in 2007, 2008, it was in extreme disrepair. One of the first projects I inherited was repairing and overseeing the project as we not necessarily updated, but preserved and repurposed this space. You know, you could hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 9 to 10 caskets in there. You got to think in 1911, they didn't have modern power equipment. So they weren't going out in the backhoe to dig graves, and the ground did freeze back then. So you can only imagine how they would use a holding house when ground conditions weren't conducive to have a graveside service. It was just another place to store the bodies until the weather broke. Another mystery is I've always seen the photography of this, the bronze fountain that used to be at Oak Hill Cemetery. And you can see the postcard on the left versus the picture on the right. This would be about where our Veterans Plaza is now. Now, a couple of years back, my guys found this marker because it was one of the mysteries that I didn't know what happened. And it said gift of Bertha Heeger. So I went and pulled Bertha Heeger, found out that she was actually interred here. And in the folder, found that she dedicated money to restoring the fountain and turning it into a flower garden area, because the fountain had quit working sometime years before that. So I had a timeline. This was from 1972, this article. I know the superintendent that was here in the mid 80s, and he said it wasn't here then. So I started really narrowing my search. I knew that it was in the inventory of art with the National Archives and where it was made and how it was done. I was planning on hoping to find it, you know, in one of your archives, like one of the Picassos, to where, you know, I was thinking it might be sitting down there in the warehouse at the library or the museum, but I wasn't lucky to find that because I thought it would be a cool centerpiece for a cremation garden. I have in our archives where it was purchased. These are the actual cemetery minutes where it was discussed. But then I was going through a box one day, and all I found were these two pictures and the date of 1977 on it. They were Polaroid pictures that shows how it collapsed during a storm of some sort. I've never been able to find a police report showing, you know, what actually happened to it, but it's one of the mysteries that kind of is solved in my dreams of a centerpiece for a cremation garden went awry when I found these pictures. Now, granted, to kind of give you a perspective, if you're familiar with Oak Hill Cemetery where the Veterans Plaza is, that would be where the Veterans Plaza is nowadays. General Robert Evans, his gravesite is here at Oak Hill. That's the city's namesake. His grave was one of the ones that was moved out after the Civil War. There's a honing plaque right at the main entrance on the island, one of the 3 honing plaques that we have here at Oak Hill Cemetery. You know, I wanted to update his burial site as we celebrated the bicentennial back in 2012. So we contracted with a local monument company to do some repair works and to kind of bring that up to snuff and kind of preserve it for many years to come. Another win is the first publicly built mausoleum was built in the 1920s. And that's right here is pictured. It's one of my favorite pieces is the stained glass that's within it. It was in disrepair. It contains 32 crypts. They're all full. It was originally built for $28,000. As you can see for the pictures, it had become in a state of disrepair several years ago. But through the power of casino gambling, we were able to use some riverboat gambling money that we get through the City of Evansville to do some repairs. And you can see some how the marble was replaced and refurbished. Here's a before and after. And we opened this up for a lot of our tours and walks. They tuck pointed and resealed. We put new vents in. Those vents weren't cheap. One of my predecessors had actually plugged up 4 of the air ventilation vents, and that's why it was holding moisture, we found.
Yeah.
We were able to do that. Now, this time of year, we always have the big draw about the gypsy.
Mhm.
And this is an article about the gypsy burial that was out at Oak Hill Cemetery. We have the Queen of the Gypsies here. There was apparently a service where more than 6,000 people were in the cemetery that day back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then the Gypsy King back in 1900 was buried beside his wife. And this is what the marker looks like. It's about 200 yards just north of where I sit here in the office. And it's where the King and Queen of the Gypsies are buried. And we're actually going to have this one on the walking tour this year with reenactors, so it'll be interesting. Now, I know that's kind of short on Oak Hill. I want to go over to Locust Hill Cemetery that was built in 1855. It's roughly about a third the size of Oak Hill in land and interments. It's right around 30,000 interments. This is a view off Crattsville. This is a satellite shot of the cemetery versus the lots, the way it's lotted out. It was built in 1850 or 1855. Originally, it was the city cemetery for the town of Lamasco. And when Lamasco and Evansville merged in 1905 or 6, the city of Evansville took over the operation of Locust Hill Cemetery. So pre-1905, a lot of my records are not what they should be, because a lot of those are gone versus there was a fire at some point, and I found articles to mention that. Some historic pictures of Locust Hill Cemetery. One of my dreams would be to rebuild this bell tower that you see. I think I have an idea of where it was located, because I think we found some of the workings, like the footers, over the years in a couple of the sections. There originally was also a chapel at Locust Hill where the gazebo is now, and you can see that pictured. There's actually 3 lakes at one point. And you can see the chapel and Chapel Park pictured here. And this would be the other view, would be looking on from Crattsville into the cemetery. The chapel is where the gazebo is now, if you're familiar with Locust Hill Cemetery. Again, here's another example of a burial that happened at Locust Hill to give you an idea of what the grave sites looked like around the turn of the century with all the flowers. That's one of the things that amazes me. When I see the older burials, the use of flowers was much more prevalent now, or I mean then than now. I mean, we still have people provide flowers for graves, but it just seems like it was a lot more involved around the turn of the century than it is today. I think that's just as cultures change. There's a residence and office that was closed by the city in 2006 that's still there. It was built in 1934. By Frank Greasy, the mayor of Evansville. Again, we use it for storage now. Here's where you talk a little bit about work that was done, where they did some work on the chime system that used to be there, recording equipment that used to play music for grade size services. Again, that would be another dream to get that back up and running at Locust Hill. Originally, this is an advertisement from May 5th, 1929 of the original Temple of Peace that was going to be built as a mausoleum at Locust Hill Cemetery. Here's a nice rendering from the picture. Now, could you imagine? I found this and I'm like, why didn't they build that? Look at the date. Now, what happened in 1929?
Yeah, a bit of an economic slide.
That was never built. And this is another one that mentioned the construction of the 800 crypt mausoleum, where they started talking about building the mausoleum back in 1977, and how there was some, how much they pay, some other stuff, but the cemetery was mentioned. And then in 1981, they built the modern Chapel of Eternal Peace, which you see from Crattsville. Another piece of stained glass work that I really like. It was built under Mayor Vanderveer. One of the famous pictures of any cemetery, Oak Hill or Locust Hill, would be the one from 1937 when Eleanor Roosevelt visited the gravesite of James Bethel Gresham. So a lot of people, which I'll get into, James Bethel Gresham was the first American killed in World War I. And his gravesite, he's interred at Locust Hill Cemetery. He was brought back, I believe, in 1921 to be placed at his final resting place in the veterans section. Now, this was when I believe that's the governor and the mayor in the picture, if I'm not mistaken. And this was when Roosevelt was on a tour, because you look at the date, November 13th, 1937, they were kind of seeing how the area was recovering after the floods that had happened earlier that year with the 37 floods. So she paid homage to James Bethel Gresham. This is the veterans area where Gresham's interred. His burial is right here. At the base of the flagpole, it's actually a monument to James Bethel Gresham that was placed later. And then in 2017, we actually dedicated the Arboretum at Locust Hill as the James Bethel Gresham Arboretum. And we had a nice little program where the ambassador from France for the area district of Chicago actually came down, and we had several retired generals and other military folks. Now, here's a story that you guys at the museum can appreciate. One day we were digging in our dirt barn and came across this. Now, a lot of people don't realize about every 50 years or so, you can apply to get your veteran stones replaced. And they had done a mass replacing of stones somewhere around 1980 or 90-ish, late 80s, early 90s at Locust Hill. So somebody had the foresight to save the Gresham one, because you're supposed to technically destroy these per the VA when they get replaced. The original Gresham stone is in the DAV chapter room at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Now, when I came across this, Tom, I can't remember if I worked with you.
You did.
And, I didn't hate to sound like Indiana Jones, but I knew it belonged in a museum.
We were very pleased to receive that as a commemoration of Gresham. Yep.
Basically, that's the second headstone that's now on display with the Gresham area inside your facilities. And we've preserved a piece of history for future generations of Americans. And actually, his burial in 1921 is in the picture above the memorial marker there. But before that stone was placed, there was a little glass jar that basically had a note in there that he was killed in France, gave his life for you and me, is what it said on there. Here's a picture, a blow-up of that picture that you guys have above the monument there at the museum. And then that kind of sums up Gresham in the Cliff Notes version. We'll get into that a little later. Here's a foggy day I took at Locust Hill, my picture. Another one that I took of the veterans area on a sunny day in the early winter to show you how peaceful it is. One of the things I want to talk about is the cemeteries today. This is the veterans area at Oak Hill Cemetery. And this, you'll sometimes see the horse-drawn hearse that comes out to our facility. It's owned by Boone Funeral Home. It's actually, it dates back to 1853. So that carriage is actually as old as Oak Hill Cemetery. Any motorcycle riders out there? This is actually called The Last Ride. And when you see this, you'll know that somebody died in a motorcycle accident, or they were an avid motorcyclist, and the funeral homes have access to bring this in. This last ride, I show this slide because when it's the only time I've ever seen people take out their phones at a service and start taking selfies with the hearse. And it's usually led in by a bunch of motorcycles, and it's very impressive to see. We've actually had weddings at Oak Hill Cemetery under my tenure. This one right here that's pictured, there was a funeral going on at the same time on the other side of the hill. Here's another picture of the horse-drawn carriage at a veterans service earlier this year, or actually late last year, to show you how it's still in use with the draft horses and everything. The city built the Veterans Plaza in 2001 as our commitment to veterans, and that's still visible. It's where we have a lot of our gatherings. Here's a picture of what the administration building and office looks like today. Coming soon, we're working with Ponham Software and Cemetery 360. Some of this stuff you can already access with the 360 views, on our websites and stuff.
Hmm.
But we're working with GIS mapping to have the cemetery completely mapped out with GIS mapping. And we have it available in-house, but we're going through and cleaning it up right now before we make it available to the public. And it would be tied in with 360 imagery to where you can go to your gravesite. And I show this picture because this is where I'll be buried, about 75 yards from the cemetery.
So-
I can actually look over my shoulder on any given day and see my family and know where I'm going to be. And that's kind of keeps it in perspective when you have those bad days out here.
Yes.
Well, I mean, my body will be there. You know, I won't be there, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
MLS is one of one of the providers. It's like real estate listings that we sell our graves on. Also, we got our ArbNet accreditation back in 2017 for both city cemeteries. The Arboretum at Oak Hill Cemetery is named after William Holbrooks, who's pictured here. He's the third superintendent and responsible for many of the tree varieties that you see planted here today. We couldn't do it without our volunteers. That's our assistant superintendent, Becky Zock there. She brought the idea back from the Arboretums from cemetery school, and everybody with Sean Dickerson and some of the volunteers kind of ran with the ball. We have students with UE involved. The Arboretums are both certified. Oak Hill is a level 2 because there's more than 100 species. Locust Hill is a level 1 because there's only more than a 25 species. Level 4 is the highest, but when you start getting into 3 and 4, you have to have dedicated educational staff, and we just don't have the funding for stuff, but we'll get there. Another thing, cremation rates are rising. We have our new cremation garden open at Oak Hill. Some pictures of that. We also, as cremation rates, have added cremation niches inside at the Chapel of Eternal Peace at Locust Hill. One of the things, so you'll see a solar farm that went operational in 2018. That's along Morgan Avenue. That's actual cemetery land. It's leased for 40 years. We bring revenue in that kind of offsets our mowing costs from that. You ask, why did they do it for 40 years? Well, that's the average life of a solar panel. So it's a 25-year agreement with 3 5-year renewals for a total of 40 years. We have different kind of events in the cemetery. We have the butterfly release. Now, we haven't done it post-pandemic, but we have butterfly releases. We have other events go on. Also, another big thing is the Evansville Adopt an Ash program, where we have 23 endangered ash trees within Oak Hill Cemetery. These are some of the ones you can go to the website and you can actually adopt for their treatment. But we do things like the Twilight Tour in October to raise money to save these trees. And we've been able to raise the money to give these trees the medicine that they need in order to fight the emerald ash borer, so we're not going to lose our ash trees. And you figure roughly 7 or 8% of the trees that you see in the public rights of ways in the Evansville area are ash trees. So I encourage you to get them treated. We've had Halloween events with the puppies over the years. Again, with the pandemic we have going on right now, we're not going to do that this year. We also are a regional site for Veterans Day services, and we were honored with that honor again for 2021. Veterans Day is obviously on the, never mind the date there, but on November 11th. The service is at 11 o'clock at Locust Hill and 1 o'clock at Oak Hill. And at the one at Oak Hill, the mayor gives out the Veteran of the Year award. But I always like the significance of the 11th day, the 11th hour, the 11th month, and the 11th minute that we do at Locust Hill with the first World War I victim and James Bethel Gresham being interred there. We do Wreaths Across America. But here's what I think you're wanting, Tom and Tory. These are the unfiltered cemetery stories. I don't know, can we get everybody to sign a virtual waiver?
Yes, I'm signing. I'm signing right now.
That's right.
Now, I remind you that you don't go into Oak Hill Cemetery and Arboretum or Locust Hill for that matter after dark unless you're with a trained professional like myself. But here's where we get into some of the interesting stories that we've seen over the years. Actually, we had a gentleman plant a palm tree on his grave. Wasn't approved. The burials run this side, so he actually planted that thing on another person's grave. So we've actually, I'll never forget the day my staff called me and said, hey, there's a palm tree that popped up over the weekend. Legit.
That's crazy.
Sounds biblical.
That you can't.
Yes, it does.
We had to remove the palm tree.
Is the palm tree gone or is it still there?
It's gone. It's gone.
Okay. Does it not?
We allowed the gentleman to come and get it. My version of what I wanted to happen and what didn't happen was probably for the best of the city, because I was going to run the damn thing through the chipper and give the owner back the chippings. I'm being real. I mean, you're behind the scenes here. My boss and talked some sense into me that probably wasn't in the best interest of the city cemeteries. So we allowed them to come and get it back, because the climate here won't sustain that type of tree.
Sure.
It wasn't approved and it wasn't on the correct lot.
That's pretty bold.
Yeah. We do have a lot of wildlife in cemeteries. I don't have pictures of the turkeys at Oak Hill, but here's a turkey in the veterans area of Locust Hill Cemetery. So there are turkeys within the city limits. We've had deer in here, as you can see. We also have coyotes, and they come through and use our ground for feeding, and they more or less keep things in check. So it's not offhand to see the occasional coyote rolling through. Odds are they're staying far away from you. If a coyote gets more than 50 yards from you, something's wrong with it. And, we need to remove it. We actually have had people drop their pets in here. And I spent 3 weeks trying to locate this little guy. He sent me pictures of, but we couldn't find it. And the thing that's sad is there's a herpetological society here in Evansville. And these are the things that I didn't know existed. But that animal's actually in distress, because the herpetological folks said the darkness on the beard talked about that animal being in stress. So I spent a lot of time trying to find out what we could do to save it, but I didn't have any luck.
Do you have any vultures around the cemetery?
Yes, we do. And I have a feeling that that's what happened, or an owl. Now here at Locust Hill Cemetery, this is where the veterans area is. I want you to pay attention to this house that I'm highlighting right here. This is Buena Vista. And I can't make this stuff up, because we're right across the street from the cemetery, and this is their Christmas display as seen from the cemetery. That is Santa Claus relieving himself into a toilet.
Yeah, that's what it looked like, but I couldn't quite believe that.
Yeah, there's motion lights. And
their motion? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and you'll see that from time to time.
How nice.
I'm selling graves when you got that going on. But that's an interesting thing with dealing. I actually took on Pokemon Go and won.
Oh, good for you.
We battled the Pokemon. I caught them all and got them gone. Now, there was an incident here on Monday, February 4th, 2013 at 1:38 a.m. where our security system heard voices on the recording. And this is the actual police report, or the run card, showing that it actually happened, because I don't have the recordings, but they played them back for me. And it sounded like a man and a woman having a conversation in our office. And the officers, after they cleared the area, said, "Chris, this is your domain. I'm out," and they kind of freaked out a little bit. But it was the Monday after the Super Bowl. I got woken up and had to come out here expecting to find somebody had broken into the office. And who knows what it was? It could have been ghosts. It's that time of year. This is a story from Tim Rakestraw. Let's see if it'll play.
My name's Tim Rakestraw, and one afternoon around 11:30, Chris and I was over here in a section looking at some work that needed to be done, and we both just looked at the same area and this green smoke mist looking thing just arose up from the ground, and it kind of just dissipated off in the air. It kind of gave me some chills, and I looked at Chris, and we were both looked kind of stunned for a minute, but I couldn't tell you what it was, but it was definitely something I'd never seen.
So there you have it. He owns Rakestraw Monument Companies, and him and I had an experience back in 2016 in the broad daylight here with some green mist. Another story that I could tell is, if you see this picture here, out in here, you can kind of see where I've blown it up. I had these amateur ghost hunters show up one time with this picture, and they go, "Well, we're apologizing. We were in here." They were from Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And the car that they came up in, I don't know how it made it here from Hopkins, Kentucky. And the lady comes in here and was freaked out. We're like, we were reviewing our pictures we took in here a couple weeks ago at night, and we came across this, and we need to know where it's at. And the ladies in the office are like, well, there's only one person that can look at that picture and tell you where it's at in the cemetery. And just so happens, you see this vine right here?
Mhm.
This vine on that tree has been bothering me for years because I can't get it to go away. So I knew exactly where to go. And I took them to here. And if you go out in the section to where most of these things are, they just hopped out of their car. They wanted to take a picture. And I said, don't you want to go out there? And they're like, why? And I said, I'll lay money that looked like a child and that there's some infant graves out there. I'll lay money that there's infant graves out there in that area. And the lady was shocked when we went out. There wasn't one, but there was actually 4 infant graves in that area where we saw this right here. And if you look at it, I wish I had better imagery on the picture they shared with me, but it almost looks like a child in period dress from around the turn of the century. These are from like 1902 to 1903-ish. But seeing's believing, you know, and I mean, I can't make these stories up. Between Tim and then Liz Ertl, our volunteer, caught an orb in broad daylight in section G. These are split seconds before as a reference. And you see the orb right here, obviously. And she caught some more orbs. And this is the stuff this time of year that people like to hear the stories about. You can see the orb bouncing here between picture 1 and 2. See where I'm highlighting?
Mhm.
I've got some other stories, but we'll have to save those for another time due to time. But we've even made Evansville watch, believe it or not.
Strangest looking fish I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, maybe they're creating life in an area where life comes to an end. And
Circle.
And I caught the end of the rainbow, where the rainbow was actually ending in the back of the cemetery, if you see it through here. And there wasn't a pot of gold, but that's out the back of the office. But here's my contact information. If you have any questions or want some genealogy, or you're interested in purchasing a space, feel free to contact us here. We are 2 working facilities here between Oak Hill Cemetery and Arboretum and Locust Hill Cemetery and Arboretum. And we have a lot of fun here too. I mean, we've got a good crew, good team. Everybody puts the families first. We're part of city government, obviously, so that has its challenges. But are there any questions that either of you might have?
well, I was wondering, did you say there's 70,000 that are interred at
71.
71? So I don't know, what's the estimated capacity of Oak Hill and Locust Hill? Or do you know?
Yeah, if you remember, let me pull the map back up. Let me go back in my slides. If you remember the layout here of Oak Hill, and we put it up for a point of reference, this represents 125 acres of lotted land, and it's by far not used. We have roughly, if you go to this picture, where the solar farm is and about another 38, we've got about 50 acres or so back there of undeveloped land. Cremation rates in the country are going to be above 90% in the next 30 years. So when you look at it that way, I can take 3 acres of undeveloped cemetery land and put 80,000 cremains on that land if I design it right. So taking that metric into account, we've probably got between 300 and 400 years of cemetery left if cremation rates and planning goes the way it should for future generations to come. At Locust Hill, we have about 30 acres or about 25 acres of unused cemetery land. And again, a lot of people don't realize the ball diamonds that are right next to the cemetery. That's actual cemetery land that we lease to the Howe Booster Club, or the, not the Howe Booster Club, but the Harwood Booster Club. And, you know, that could be taken back for cemetery use down the road as we run out of land. But in our lifetime, Tom, we're not going to have any concerns. And
Okay.
you know, 300 years is conservative if cremation rates do what the experts are saying within the next 30 years. And that's assuming that somebody's in my spot that can plan effectively to make sure that the land is used correctly.
Yeah,
So
that's
Chris,
interesting.
what inspired you to go down this path of wanting a position like this and to study as much as you had?
Well, I had a history background. I'm a graduate of Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana. And I was a history classics guy, even though it's a liberal arts college. I've been a fan of history, even going back as a student of Bill Bartell back in high school. Even before that, I always loved local history. And I had a management background in some of my previous opportunities. And if you would have told me that I would have been here 13 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. When Ed threw me the keys, he said, another thing you need to do is you need to get educated in the industry. So I sought out the ICCFAU. It's the only accreditation program that's out there, and we didn't have the money to go. So I had to apply for grants. And I'm happy to say that both myself and Becky Zock, the assistant superintendent, are both graduates of the program and both have our master's degree. And it was all done with grants and scholarships at minimal cost to the taxpayer. So the only thing we were out is like our travel and our hotel to go to this program. It's offered for 1 week a year, and you have to go for a minimum of 4 years. And to be honored to be in the valedictorian back in 2013, I've since been able to speak at the international conference a couple times, which is always interesting, but it's a great honor. I spoke at it was supposed to be in Vegas this past year, but it became a virtual conference. So I had my first virtual conference experience, but it's still to be in the industry. I sought out people to be mentors and found that there's a lot of folks that are aging out of the industry and they were welcoming younger folks in. So I had a few people take me under their wing, and I've got this network of professionals around the country, internationally for that matter, where if I see something, because when we have a bad day here, it's not like I can pick up the phone and say, hey, what are you doing here if you run into this situation?
Makes sense.
My problems on any given day can go back to 1853 and 1853 respectively. Say if somebody had a bad day back in the 20s and they measure right where they were putting great grandpa, and now fast forward, there's only one spot left in the family lot, and we find out that great grandpa is about 6 inches off. Those are challenging days for us. And now I know what to do, but originally I had to build that network up to where I'm the go-to a lot. And there's even times when I have to call and say, hey, what do you do in this situation, just to make sure it's the best practice for the industry. My mentor is Casey Miller, who's the head of the Catholic Diocese Cemetery in Fort Wayne, and he's the executive director of the Indiana Cemetery Association. I have him on speed dial, and usually if Casey hadn't seen it, I've yet to encounter something that he hadn't seen.
I got to ask you this. What is your thoughts on the supernatural when it comes to ghosts? And, you've had a few experiences, but I always like to ask that, especially on our Halloween tipsy topics.
I've had experiences in here. I'm not going to lie. They're mainly positive experiences, never really too negative. Usually when I see an orb or the green mist, as we talked about in the earlier with Tim, or if I go back and I take pictures of work orders. And then when I go back and review the pictures, there might be something that showed up in the picture that I wasn't aware of when I was taking said picture. But when I go back and research the grave sites around where those anomalies happen, usually it's somebody that died under duress, like an accident, or were murdered, or some heinous act, or they were children. And 9 times out of 10, it falls into those categories and can be explained that these folks might have had an unsettling demise and might not have transitioned spiritually to where most of us would want to go. I've had a lot of people with a lot of different religions come through our gates, and we treat them all with dignity and respect. I've had Wiccans, I've had, every type of Eastern religion, Far East, Middle East, Catholics, Lutherans, non-denominational. It seems like regardless of that, there is something out there on another plane that we're not as versed as we should be on. But I've seen too many things out here over my time to discount that there's not something out there. And the pictures I shared, I bring the proof. I'm not going to sit here and tell you a story unless I document it, because I'm a historian. I got to document it. But do I see full on, stuff that you would see in Hollywood out here? No. But mainly it's orbs or green mist, and you can research that on the internet. And or it might get a little, I could sleep on the grounds in here and it wouldn't bother me. The only thing that really creeps me out at night personally is coming into the office when the alarm's going off at like 2 in the morning and the fog's rolling in and you're by yourself. That kind of puts it in perspective. I mean, I was preparing for a presentation one time and there was an orb in my, it was right around dark in the wintertime, and there was an orb in my office. And that's when I hit save and I said, oh, it's time to go, you know. But I think it was withdrawal. My predecessors. And then I heard down in the basement here, I heard what sounded like a card party. And I talked to one of my predecessors and he confirmed that he heard stories that they used to play cards down in the basement here years ago. And I said, well, I think I heard them because you'll come in sometimes and it smells like pipe smoke in the office. And I'm not talking like special blend. I'm talking like tobacco pipe. And you know what I mean by special blend, Tom.
Oh,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm not talking about that Illinois blend. I'm talking about the pipe tobacco. It has a distinct smell. And sometimes you'll come in and it smells like somebody smoked a pipe in here. Lo and behold, I found that one of my predecessors used to sit behind the desk and smoke a pipe daily. It's just kind of odd because nobody here smokes pipe. And it just, stories like that, there's been too many occurrences over my 13 plus years to discount that there's nothing out there.
Mhm.
I've seen everything wildlife wise, but Bigfoot, if I found Bigfoot, I've seen about every type of wildlife that the area has to offer. I've got stories for holidays that, you know, like Valentine's Day stories that I can't tell in this public forum. But you would think when I run people out of here, most of it's at night. Actually, it's during the noontime lunch hour. We have more problems with running people out like couples. The cemetery is a hot place for that sometimes.
A little nooner quick retreat, yeah.
And one of which was on, I had to go off air one time on calling it in because it was on Valentine's Day. And we were getting ready to lead a funeral in. And I didn't want to make Evansville watch because I knew if it made Evansville watch, we would have a national news story here that we busted a couple in here on Valentine's Day in front of nearby where a funeral was going to be going on.
No, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll go in the book someday that I'm going to write. I'm going to have
You should. That would be a bestseller, I think.
The big difference though is we treat every family that comes through the doors like they're our own. And from day one, even when I was young, I asked my staff, I said, as long as we treat everybody the same, whether it's the richest person or somebody that's a trustee or Medicaid burial, we treat those families with dignity and respect. You're never going to have any problem from me.
Mhm.
And we've done that or tried to do that every day since then, and we still will going forward.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. Because that's when people really need support and they're vulnerable and sad. And yeah, that's a great motto. Yeah.
And I hate to run through all those slides. That's a lot of information to try to get through, but I wanted to get through and have time for questions and stuff like that because I like the opportunity that you're giving here. Even though it's the spooky time of year, that's why I wanted to throw some of those slides in to show you some of the stuff that I've experienced because it's a question I get. Let me tell you, when you go to a party and you don't know anybody, don't tell them you work for a cemetery. I usually say I work because sometimes it creeps people out.
Well, you know what creeps me out is when I look at those slides and I'm sort of an amateur lawn warrior at heart. I think, my gosh, how much weed eating time must one have on a daily basis?
We do some preventative spraying, not with Roundup, but with growth inhibitor. Our contractor will spray around the headstones 2 or 3 times a season. That actually slows down the grass growth around the headstones. Promotes, it kills weeds and promotes the grass to where they don't have to weed eat as often as they normally would if they didn't spray. It's actually cost effective that way to where they do. If you ever see them in here spraying, that's what they're doing. So they can cut back on the amount of weed eat. And if you weed eat less, there's less likelihood of any damage to the headstones. So actually we're weed eating less now than we were 13 years ago.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Well, it's been great having you with us, Chris. I mean, this is fascinating. It's Evansville's history. It lies there, I guess, sort of literally. But to think about all the stories that are there, all the history that is Locust Hill and Oak Hill, and that's great.
And we've got tours throughout the year. We're getting back up to speed after COVID. It's kind of, we're watching the numbers and Hopefully in 2022, we'll be adding more events again. But we're doing the Twilight Tour this fall. We have Veterans Day coming up on the 11th, and then we'll do the Wreaths Across America the third Saturday in September or in December. One of the things I always want to preface is we are a working facility. Graves run $9.95. You can put $100 down and make monthly payments of $74.59. We have cremation niches that start at $1,095, and we still have mausoleum crypts available. So if you're interested in that, you can call me or contact me at the information that I provided below, and we'll set up a time to meet.
Well, that is something that will not go out of demand.
No,
Right.
I got a recession-proof industry right here.
Yes, indeed.
But I honestly was hoping that you guys had that sculpture down there next to the Picasso, you know, for me, waiting for my cremation garden. That I was hoping somebody had it in storage somewhere. And
I don't think I've tripped over that one.
And no conservation's been done, so.
but you know, one of the goals, I've got goals, and when I get the funding, I'll roll forward with it. But I've got a great team here, great individuals that work for me, and it's a great team effort here at the City Cemetery. So I'm just the coach, you know, I've got great players.
Well, that's great. And, you know, we're lucky to have great players down here at the Evansville Museum too. And Tory and I are blessed with that. And we're here Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, open to the public, 11 to 5 on Fridays and Saturdays, and 12 to 5 on Sundays. Would invite people to come down and visit us and see all the things we have to offer at the Evansville Museum. Speaking of which, Tory has a very special exhibit going on right now.
And so what you're seeing here is the book cover of L'Autremont, Maldoror, or Maldoror, which is perfect theme for this top and for Halloween. So if you're interested to learn about Salvador Dali, come down to our exhibition, the main gallery, Salvador Dali's Stairway of Heaven, and you'll learn about his connection to Maldoror and also to the Divine Comedy from Dante. So we hope that you come by to the Evansville Museum and check out these fantastic exhibitions, programs, and see Tom and I. So thank you so much. And Chris, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.